Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining this month's office hours. Uh, this session is going to be recorded and it'll be available on the analytics user group channel, which is in the pinned comment in the chat. So feel free to grab that link and look at the past office hours as well as this one, which will be posted in a day or two. My name is Mandy George. I'm a senior e-commerce analyst at Staples Canada, and this is my third year in the Analytics Champions Group. And I will pass it off to the others to introduce themselves. Megan, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Megan Powers. This is also my third year in the Champion program. I lead a team at CarMax called Digital Data Strategy, and we are responsible for capturing all of our every piece of digital data that CarMax owns across all our properties. So, and we own Adobe Analytics and Target, as well as some other tools. Been there about 9 years. So, yeah, happy to be here today. Answer any questions. Feel free to post any in the chat as we're going.
Hi, I'm Gatai Ben-Ami. This is also my third year in the Champion program. I work for Accenture as a consultant, doing implementation work for the most part, Adobe Analytics CJA, and moving a little bit into some RT-CDP work as well. And yeah, just been doing it a long time.
And I'm Christine. I am first year champion, so I'm new amongst the veterans, but I work for EY in consulting as well, so doing a lot of implementations similar to Gatai with Adobe Analytics, CJA, and also Target. So very excited to be here and answer any questions.
Excellent. So I will share my screen with some pre-submitted questions that we have. Perfect. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can add them in the chat at any time. Otherwise, we do have a couple of questions that were pre-submitted. So the first one is, in the follow report, if we want to understand where exactly visitor navigated away, how to understand that. We tried with breakdown followed at this touch point, but the number doesn't seem correct. It shows the page visitor visited also. So Megan, do you want to take this one first since you put in some comments?
Sure. So let's see. And you know, I don't know your specific use case, of course, but you can do the fallout report like you suggested. Another thing you can do is use the flow report. So if you scroll down, Mandy, I built a flow report, and you can, if you've never built a flow report before, it'll by default pull in page dimension. Yeah. And we'll pull in the most popular page and show where you go to and go from that. So if you have a specific page that you want to look at, you can pull that to the middle and then look at the subsequent pages after that and see where a customer navigated to. You know, anything that's not your desired page, like in the follow-up report, is going to be shown in that list. So that's one method you can use. And then within a follow-up report, one thing you can do is do the breakdown fallout like you have tried and suggested. And if you scroll down a little further, Mandy, yeah, so I did that with the little fallout report I created above, but I changed the page dimension, which it gives you out of the box, to exit page. So that could help solve your problem potentially. Because yeah, otherwise it's not always showing you where they exited, just the other pages on your site that they went to instead of your desired page. But if you pull an exit page there, that might help know where they eventually left your site from. So those are just some ideas. Anyone else want to jump in there?
You could do a then segment. So I think then segments support an exit. So they're at this page, and then they're at another page, and then they exit. So that might be, and you could do it like within one. The exit is in within one hit, something like that. Yeah, something like that, I think might be another opportunity to sort of like get those people who are exiting and then what page they're exiting on. Could be another way of doing it.
Yeah, and you can type in equals a certain page, or instead of change the equals to just exists. Stuff like that. So that could be a good substitute for an exit as well. Yeah.
I always like to have like two ways of doing anything in Adobe Analytics, because it allows you to check that both methods are working and see how much they agree. And I think that's one of the big powerful things about Adobe Analytics is there's usually at least two ways of checking it. So always nice to have a few different ways.
Yeah, I'm personally a fan of the flow diagram. The followed is great if you've got a pre-designed path, but especially in like some areas of the site where you could do multiple different actions. With the follow, they have to do every step in that in order to continue through. Whereas the flow just sort of shows you what happened. So when I'm trying to find where people are dropping off, if it's not like in the checkout, I feel like the flow is probably going to be a bit more descriptive, because you can continue to add touch points. So if you, instead of starting with, a page in the middle, you can set a page as the beginning and then just see where they went after that. And each of these little red bits is going to tell you how many people exited the site. So this is another great way to see how people, where they exited.
And I really like, Mandy, to your point on the flow, sometimes even though you're looking for the exit, like in this particular case, if you're looking at a specific question or trying to answer a specific question, sometimes I find that looking at the flow actually kind of gives me some new ideas, or even poses some new questions, because it's like, oh, wait, why are, from the home, why are they going to that app launch? Or, why are they going to that second or third? Or maybe whatever notions you have of how your visitor is acting, maybe looking at that flow kind of spins that on its head and gives you a new opportunity to look at something else. So I feel like the flow is maybe a little like a little underused. But yeah.
It's more flexible too than the follow, I find. All right. Any other comments before moving on to the next question? Okay. So the second one is CGA specific. Hello, I'm building a filter in CGA that is for aborted application, meaning it has entered a process but no receipt. I'd like to know why the following doesn't work. Visitor, item does not contain receipt, but this does. Exclude visitor, item contains receipt. When I test the first one, I get users with receipt, but not the second one. I've tried different versions of the first, exclude, etc. It seems logical, but it'd be much easier for people if they could build it that way. All right. Does anybody want to start with this one?
I have a thought. So one of the things that I'm thinking about here is that because it's with a visitor, it's looking at a broader time period. And so visitor does not contain receipt. It may be what I think is likely that's going on there. And again, I'm kind of speculating on this one. is that perhaps because it is looking at such a long time frame, there's the possibility that it's looking at a whole bunch of things and that's not working. Whereas if you look at exclude visitor with receipt, then that's going to work better. But I also think that it's likely to exclude people that you're not intending to exclude. So the way I might do it is I might instead have visit where it has the start but not the receipt. And so we're looking specifically at the visit, and then using that segment and putting visitors underneath it. That might get you a more accurate picture of what you're going for.
And to your point, Gitai, before of having multiple ways of doing something in Adobe, like to be able to double check, I commonly have issues when I'm using a filter that's exclude. So I end up going into like the UI and I'll probably, like I play around a little bit and try to figure out based on the data, like what I'm seeing. So it was interesting to me that somebody was having an issue with the regular filter and not the exclude, because I typically have issues with exclude. But this one might be where, you just kind of have to play around with the criteria, compare it. You might have to do a little bit of manual filtering, to get down to like the data that you're looking for to build that segment and make it a little easier going forward.
Yeah, I'll just call it the data we've got here is all sample data. So that's why some of it might look weird or limited. But yeah, I just quickly built out versions of those two segments. So one does not contain, and then I just use category 5. And then the other one is an exclude. So yeah, when you do the does not contain, especially at a visit or a visitor level, if there is still one hit that does contain it, it'll still show up. So if you've got 3 hits in your visit and one of those 3 hits contains category 5 and another doesn't contain it, you've met that criteria. So it's going to bring in the entire visitor still, which is why you're probably still getting, some people with receipts. But they exclude, if it's found, then it's excluding the entire visitor. But the sort of downside of that is you can see that all these other pages have lower amounts of visits as well because it's excluding the entire visitor. So that's another issue that you sort of run into.
Yeah, we might do, going back to, maybe it's just on my brain, might go back to doing a then segment, and excluding the then segment, where you've got, yes, you have this, but then within one hit, there's not this. So that might be another way of going about it, to get that exclusion put into place. And especially if it's within one hit, that's gonna lessen the number of things that are excluded.
So then sort of, where are you putting the exclude in this segment?
I think I'd make the whole thing an exclude segment.
Okay.
Or it would be sorry, if it's page where this happens, then this happens within one hit. You could exclude that, or you could do a then segment where the start happens, then the receipt does not exist within one hit. So that would be, and of course specific to your case, wherever that receipt happens, that'd be another way of doing it, because then you've got the start but you don't have the end, and that might be a way of just making sure that you end up with a very, very specific event happening. Because as Mandy keeps demonstrating, like it captures more. Each of those containers captures more.
Yeah. All right. So even though they said the question was CJ, this applies to Workspace as well. They both kind of work the same way when it comes to this. Any other comments to add about this one?
just to echo that I always use exclude versus does not exist or it's not contained. It's cleaner.
Yeah. All right. So the next question is server calls. What are some best practices to decrease server calls when traffic is continually growing?
Yeah, I can start here. I mean, so this is a good problem, right? Your traffic's growing, great. But yeah, it is a real problem because you still have a budget that you have to hit. So some tips I can think of, you can do an audit of your server calls and see what's using the most of them, and can you turn them off, reduce them in some way? Like if there's a high server call item, maybe you can just fire it the first time in a visit or the first time for like feature. One thing that we do, like at CarMax, we have many photos from all angles of our vehicles, and people tend to look at a lot of those photos, like click, like zoom in and zoom around, and we want to track those features. But we don't tag every photo because that'd be very expensive. So instead we use Adobe Analytics to just capture the first click per feature, per car. So like, do you zoom? Yes or no? Like that's a binary thing. Do you do a 360? Yes or no? That's a binary thing. Once, if you click again to do a 360 of that same car, we don't capture that click. And instead we do use Google Analytics for all the clicks, but then in Adobe, we at least get an idea of like how many people are interested in what feature per car, stuff like that. So that's just one, money saving way that we do, because that's like by far our most expensive server call usage. You can, another like very practical thing is like, hey, if I capture a click on this, what business decision am I going to make with that data? If you're not going to change anything based on that data, it might not be worth capturing. Like if you're capturing clicks on every little info button, every little infographic, every thing, or even like legal text that is going to be there no matter what, right? You're not going to remove like a privacy policy statement. You're not going to remove a CCPA or a GDPR type statement because those have to be there. Maybe you don't need to track clicks on them because you're not making business decisions based on that. You're not going to remove it because it has a low click volume or something. So or ask yourself, is there a page or click that you're just not going to do anything with? So those are some tips I have. Others feel free to jump in.
Look for anything that happens automatically that you're tracking. I've been in situations where there were videos that auto-played and all of that was being tracked, but you knew it was being played because it's automatic. That doesn't tell you anything about user interaction. It just tells you that that was happening. So that was really, really draining things. And I'll tell you a super weird case that we didn't expect to be so big, but it was. I was working with a very large national hospital system, and they had like 50,000 employees. Every time a Zoom meeting happened, it opened up their homepage. You have 50,000 employees, each of whom has multiple meetings per day. All of a sudden, you have millions of additional page views that are not reflective of customer activity, or in this case, patient activity, but are instead reflective of a setting on Zoom that needed to be changed. So just fixing that was a funny one. In the meantime, we were just able to, we were doing it through a different tag management system, so we were just able to exclude those. And it was responsible for a significant number of server calls. It was a really weird thing, but it is an existing setting on Zoom. If you have a large enough organization, that can have an impact.
That's wild.
You can also, in a similar vein, make sure you're blocking bots, unless for some reason you have to capture those, right? But like, bots are not real humans. They're going to hit your site and use server calls, but they're not going to convert. So make sure you're blocking the bots in the admin settings. You can even go in and block like good bots. You want them to crawl your site, but you don't. At least we don't want to count those in our customer traffic, so we block those. Like Google has a list of known IPs. you can go in and block those. So just, yeah, similar to the just traffic that you don't care about, block that out.
And you can get really stingy with your events too, your track action calls. If you, I worked with one team who basically to implement or to approve any event calls, it was a big deal. So they would pass basically if you were, let's say on the homepage, you used the navigation, you went to page A. In the page load for page A, they would pass all of that kind of click event tracking, and then created events and dimensions based off of that. So they really didn't use any track actions, which would also help reduce server calls. I think it was a bit extreme. I think there's definitely cases where it's really helpful to have those track actions, those click events, but that is a route to go to.
Yeah, the bots was the first thing that I think of, partly because we've been having a lot of conversations about bots lately at work. Yeah, making sure you're filtering those out. The other thing that comes to mind for me is, actions that are sort of sequential, that do you really need to capture both? So, for example, if you're on a product listing page and you click on the product and you capture the click, and then it takes you to a product page and you capture the page view. A product click, if it always takes you to the page view, do you need to fire both events? So just keeping in mind, those actions, that if it's always going to happen after something else, maybe capture one of those two.
Yeah, or like if you have a page and the only button on that page is continue, you probably don't need to track the click on the continue, because you're capturing the page name on the next page, and you can make the deduction that if they get to the next page, like they click the continue button, so like Manny's point, things like that, that are intuitive, that you can get through other Adobe methods that are out of the box, like the page pathing.
One more thing regarding the bots. One thing that I have had happen a lot of times is that the good bots are the ones that tend to slip through, and they're often ones which are your security and reliability teams are hiring for whatever purpose, because they are not on an exclude list, because they're on there for nefarious purposes or incredibly constant purposes, like the Google bot crawling your site. They tend to slip through the lists and come up quite a bit. That's something that I found a lot.
On that note, I'm going to jump us into the next question because it is also related to bot traffic. So that is a great segue. So how do you handle alerts to identify possible bot traffic that at high level don't look suspicious? I recently found unusual behavior attributed to direct traffic and narrowed it down to a handful of IPs that were visiting only 6 pages. The same IP was returning every day to hit the same pages the same number of times. This went on consecutively for months. So thoughts on bots?
So one way to track that and sort of look for that would be to first off, get your do a nice little histogram of your pages, of how many pages per visitor are normal. And if this is hitting the same 6 pages per day repeatedly for months on end, that's going to be one of those visitors that's like way, way to the left on that histogram. And at that point, you can start checking how much you could filter out for that, or you could use that just as a way to start looking for those visitors that are coming from an IP that are bot associated. The other thing that we have found is that the operating system in the user agent string is a pretty good indicator, because there are not a lot of normal humans coming in on Linux. And we found a lot on Linux and on unusual browser configurations, and that's pretty consistent. There are real humans out there using Linux, but they are not of such a volume that you can feel terrible about excluding that.
One of the things that I've done is create what's essentially like a bot calculator. So I'll make a calculated metric with a bunch of if statements. So, for example, bots don't log in, they don't have an account. So if somebody has logged in, I know they're not a bot. So they get a 0 for that score. If they've never logged in, then they get a score of 1. And I have a whole bunch of different if conditions stating, what could be bot like activity. And it ends up with a score between, 0 and however many conditions you have. And the higher the number, the more likely it is the bot. And you can apply that against different dimensions like, browser or referring domain or whatever else, and see the likelihood of the traffic coming from that source, the likelihood of it being a bot.
Mandy is the calculated metric genius. So
I do enjoy a good calculated metric.
Yeah, there are, so like we said, there are known, another thing you do is just keep blocking them proactively as much as you can. There are always going to be some that slip through, but make sure your bot filtering is on. Block those known Google bots, unless for some reason you want to capture them. There are other sites as well that have like known bot, like Ty said, like operating systems, like really old phones. You can do things. I've actually been researching this some more since I posted this, so this notes isn't here yet. But there's something called the Hit Governor you can deploy in Adobe Launch that will do things like you can set the threshold, but if there's like 60 hits in 60 seconds, you can flag that as a bot and tell Launch to exclude it, stuff like that. So there are some Adobe Launch things you can do as well to prevent that traffic from getting in. I put together like one segment here, based on your stuff, but I think you'd probably want to have more criteria, like, last touch is direct and hit depth is 1. But there can be legit customers doing that too. So probably want to, again, pull in some more criteria than that. We capture user agent in an EVAR or prop, which can be helpful in addition to looking at IP. And then I also saw in your question, you weren't sure how to set up an alert. So Mandy, I thought we could just maybe demo that real quickly as well.
Components. All right, so you want to talk it through, Megan? I'll just do the actions for you.
Sure. Yep, so you can create a new alert here. It's under components. You'll want to give it a title and a description. You can change your granularity to daily or hourly. Be careful with hourly. I don't know about you, but our data varies greatly by hours. So you might get quite a bit of pings about hourly alerts. But that preview window, once you put on a metric, that's really handy because that'll tell you how many times it'll go off. But so I usually stick with daily. I find that a week is usually too long to address issues, and hourly is too short, and get a lot of false alarms. Recipients, you can do individuals, you can do group inboxes, like our alerts go to my whole analyst team. You can put in phone numbers and get texted for alerts too. You can give it an expiration date. Maybe you want this to only go off for a month, like while you're running a campaign, or maybe you want it to go indefinitely. When it is nearing your expiration date, you will get an automated email from Adobe to go renew it. So that's very helpful. So you don't have to remember that it's going to expire. And then, you can pull in any metric, any green metric, or any green dimension item, so that the count of an EVAR, for example, like count of EVAR 5. And then there's a whole bunch of settings here. You can choose if an anomaly exists, or if it's at or below a certain number, or changes by a certain percent. So I sometimes, with my most important KPIs, I will do 2 different kinds of alerts. I will do both a, like, does it drop below like 20 a day? Right? That's bad. Something fell off a cliff. And I might also do an anomaly alert. That's particularly helpful when it's a global thing across your whole site. It could have broken on one page, but not everywhere. So if you just have the below 20, you're not going to get alerted if it broke on one page when it's really on 10. So play with it, feel what's right. It might be different for each metric. It often is. And then you can see that preview window up top here, the 30 times over the last 30 days. So that tells me, like, that's not an alert you want to set up, because that just seems like the data is normal.
Again, this is sample data, which is why it looks weird.
Yeah. And so you can pull in multiple events here. You can pull in segments to this as well. So like if you've set up one of those bot segments, you can pull that in here. Or if you've set up a certain number of a certain EVAR prop, you can pull that in as well, and it'll act like a segment. So, hopefully that's helpful. Our team uses all the time, whenever we make any new EVAR or event, it automatically gets an alert set up, because we want to have full coverage and know when something breaks.
And one thing we do too is if you have Teams or Slack, we send our alerts to Teams and or Slack. So if you have a wider group, like some of our reporting stakeholders, we don't put them on the email in the alert, but we have them in the Slack channel, so they can see, if there's an anomaly. I maybe wouldn't have like executives in that Slack channel, but for people that might be using the data and kind of, day to day in there, but that's also something you can do.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Slack channels, if you click on the name of it, you can generate an email address for the Slack channel, which is what you put in here, and then it'll send it to the channel.
Yeah, like we for the most part have a really small distro that it gets sent to, just so we don't make everyone, it like gets sent to my 5 analysts. So like we keep our developers out of it, because we want to analyze it first, like, because even sometimes if it's just a holiday, it'll go off. So like, okay, we don't need to involve everyone just because it's Thanksgiving and people are eating turkey, and not working. So what will work for your company and what will. But I would advise smaller than large, and probably not the execs on these.
Yeah, you don't want people to panic.
Yeah. When you haven't even maybe looked at it yourself to figure out if it's a real thing or not. So.
Right.
Yeah, and it takes a bit of work to figure out the granularity. So like these different thresholds. If this is firing too frequently, you're going to end up getting people not paying attention to it.
Yeah.
Like I remember at a previous job, I asked 3 of the analysts on my team, I'm like, oh, did you look at the alert today? They're like, no, there's so many, I never bother anymore.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure they're not too frequent.
Boy who cried wolf scenario.
But yeah, definitely go with people who can analyze and make sure it's real first, just because stakeholders will not readily accept that it was a false alarm, because that's not in their interest to do so. And so you'll end up doing a lot of work to prove it was a false alarm, and proving a negative is way harder than them just not getting the email at all.
One other point I'll add. So daily alerts are great, but sometimes you do want hourly ones depending on, what metrics you're looking at. One of the things that I do for hourly alerts is I have a segment created that excludes overnight hours. And for us, I also exclude weekends because our traffic is mostly B2B. So what I do with those segments is I then put them in here. And so my alert doesn't fire between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. and it doesn't fire at all on the weekends. So if you do need hourly, but you're worried about those low traffic hours creating false positives, you can make a segment to exclude certain times a day or certain days of the week. So that way it only fires when you want it to fire. All right. Are there any other thoughts about alerts?
No. Well, we've got a couple questions in the chat. Looks like one
I'll just mention real quick. There is a skill exchange about alerts specifically. If you want to go and find that.
Yeah. All right. Do we want to just go in order from the chat? We'll start at the top.
Yeah, I think.
So the first one was from Mark. How would I track page load time in Adobe Analytics?
I've posted some comments there. Feel free to add on.
Yeah. Well, just because the comments are not captured in the recording, so maybe do we want?
Oh, right. Okay. Sure.
Explanation?
Sure. Yeah, I can read those out. Okay, so that's a little bit of a tricky one because of the timing of the calls, right? You probably don't want your main analytics page load call to fire because in order to capture page load time, the whole page needs to load to get start and end point of that. So you probably don't want to delay your main analytics call for the whole page to load to be able to capture that in time. So a couple of things you could try is capturing a second async call after the original page load, but that's going to double server calls. That does wait until the full page is loaded, and then potentially the developer could put that in the data layer, and then you could grab that and pass it into an EVAR prop. Or I use the Lighthouse extension in Chrome, which is free and available, and I run diagnostics on our pages that way, which include page load time and other core web vital metrics. And then Mark provided some more information that they are capturing page load as a dimension some places, but aren't able to get the average to easily determine which pages take the longest. So a couple things I suggested were pulling that data into Report Builder to do those manual calculations, or start capturing the page load time as a numeric event as well as a dimension. That way you'll be able to do calculations.
I am of the opinion that Adobe Analytics is not fantastic for technical performance measurement just in general. So Megan mentioned the Lighthouse extension. That'd be my first go-to. There are tools which are dedicated to that sort of technical performance that are optimized for it that are going to work much, much better.
Yeah. Like Impulse is a good tool. We use that one.
All right. So the next question that was in the chat is from Melissa. I created a table in Adobe Analytics and then created a similar report builder, but added a dimension to get more detail. After adding the second dimension, that metric sum no longer matched. What steps would you recommend to verify the metric numbers before using the report builder report? So I would start by first making sure that you've got the same dimensions in both reports, because I think you mentioned that you added a second dimension in Report Builder, so make sure you add it in the workspace report as well. And then I sort of break stuff down, like break it down by, day or hour. Is there a certain time that it varied? Is there a different dimension that it varies by, like certain pages or site sections? Just trying to get more granular to see if you can find where the difference is occurring. Anyone else have thoughts on this one?
No, just agreeing with you. Make sure that the table matches what you're going to have the output of. I think that's just the best way to go about it.
Yeah. The person didn't mention A for T at all, so it's probably not related. One weird thing with A for T is when I first pull in an A for T panel, it doesn't at first match what's in Target itself because it puts like a time on there, like it puts like 3 p.m. or whatever, whereas otherwise out of the box it's like midnight to midnight, whatever. Just make sure it's not. It doesn't sound like your use case, but just make sure it's not doing anything like that. That it's like the full day, and stuff like that. Because I always have to change my A4T panels in Workspace to get that to match.
Actually, one other thing that I just thought of, if you're, so you said the metric sum in Report Builder, are you summing up the rows? Because if you sum up individual rows, you could end up with a total greater than what you see in Workspace because it automatically deduplicates stuff. Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, if we were to look at visits for pages, visits, if I were to start adding these up, then I would get a total much higher than this number here because it's deduplicated. So, and one way you can actually see it is if you select a few rows and right click and display only selected rows. So now it's treating them all as individual dimensions. And you can see that the total is different than the grand total. And it's already bigger, even with a smaller amount of pages. So be careful if you're trying to sum up rows. That could be another reason why your numbers aren't matching.
Good point.
All right, and we have one more question in the chat from Macy. I want to exclude zip code. And if time spent per visit is 0 and bounce rate is 100%, but it won't let me use bounce rate and time spent because they're custom metrics. Is this possible to use?
Technically,
can't do this.
No, like you can't pull a bounce into a segment, but you can basically recreate that with the segment. Like you can pull in, I think, like single page visits into the segment and kind of recreate what the definition of a bounce or bounce rate is.
Yeah, you could do stuff like exclude anything with a hit depth of 2 or higher.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's another way to get sort of single page visits or bounces.
Correct. Yeah. And then time spent. So yeah, bounce rate, I would just find a workaround. Like the hit depth thing is probably really easy, right? Just something to you to indicate that they bounced. I am able to pull in time spent into a segment. Any other champs know of a reason why that wouldn't be possible?
Time spent.
Like I can pull in time spent on page or visit, granular or bucketed in a segment.
Yeah, it should pull in the regular one, but if you're making a custom metric built off of it, then it won't let you use the custom metric. But if it's just the regular one, it should be able to be pulled in. Yeah. So like these ones here, you can pull in.
So if you're the question I'm asking is if you're using the bucket, are you using the bucket or are you using the granular? Because in regards to your last comment, I can do that too, but it won't work. I exclude. I'm still seeing visits of 0 seconds, and it's so if you look at what we've got. Oh, can you bring up the
Is your segment, Macy, a hit level or a visit level, or
because if you bring up the time spent, just recalling time spent is done as a dimension, and so it's going to be it's not the less than and stuff like that is oh, okay, well, here's got it. So you're using granular, doing it on visitor. That's what's happening, is that because there is a visitor that has, unless it's only a visitor who has, it's only going to exclude visitors who have only had 0 second visits. So if they've had any visit longer than 0 seconds, they're going to be included even if they had visits that were 0 seconds.
Yeah, that's similar to what we were talking about earlier with the does not equal versus the exclude.
Yeah, it's those containers are so important, and getting really drilling into the depths of what each of those means when you're trying to include and exclude is so valuable.
Yeah, another thing with when it comes to the bot traffic is whether you're excluding it at a visit or a visitor level. And there was actually a question about this on Experience League, and I remember a few of us made comments on that thread. If you exclude at a visitor level, if somebody meets your condition in the future, all of their past visits are going to get excluded as well if you're using a visitor segment. So something to keep in mind is that your historical numbers that you might have already reported on could change. And I mean, you might want that if, they weren't picked up as a bot before, but they're definitely a bot. Or it could, if people do something anomalous that makes them look like a bot, you could end up excluding their traffic. I usually do my bot exclusions at a visit level, just to sort of avoid that potential of disrupting historical data. But it all depends on sort of, how you want to report on it.
And so Macy is saying, so we need to do it on a hit level, and then we can do a bounce rate if hit depth is 0. So in this case, a visit level where the hit depth is 0, or the hit depth is, or where the time spent is equal to 0, that would probably work for the visits because you are looking at a visit. The hit level doing it on a hit level at 0 might not exclude the entire visit, or might exclude an entire visit, even though only a single hit. Well, actually, I'm not even sure that would work. Yeah, that time spent on page, if there's any page, it could be like a 100-page visit, but
Time spent per visit.
Yeah, there's a time spent per visit. Yeah. Sorry, talking out loud, thinking out loud.
Yeah, again, this is sample data, so we're not getting anything good in the preview, but yeah, the time spent per visit is probably going to be better than the time spent per page.
Yep. Yeah, for bots, particular. Yeah.
Yeah, especially you might have a number of pages that are just really super fast redirects, or they're hits that are going to come across as 0 because there's some sort of automated process. So yeah, it's better on a visit than a hit, I would think.
Yeah. Are there any other questions that people have? If not, maybe we can go around, just because we still have about 9 minutes left. I'll ask the rest of the champions, what's one thing that you learned recently that you find really cool that you want to share?
Does it have to be Adobe Analytics related?
Analytics related.
Analytics related. It was fun to see web analytics come up in the New York Times Connections game the other day. That was cool. I don't know how many people play that.
I need to look at that.
It was fun. Yeah.
We'll count that. That's analytics.
Yeah.
Fun.
So this is CJA related, but it's if you've got an experimentation panel in CJA and you are using a custom metric that is based on a summary table, and the summary table is just it's not a dynamic one. It's just like, here's a list of how many times this thing happened. It'll break. It won't work. You'll get the whole panel will break. But if you use the base metric and then throw the filter that was creating the custom metric over the top of the panel, it will then work. So that was pretty good to figure out, because we were really unsure why the panel kept breaking again and again and again.
That's a good learning. That's a very good learning. I would say this is going to be a shameless plug for Mandy and her calculated metrics. Again, I was looking at the playbook that Mandy created, and I thought I had an issue that I could not solve. And I found a calculated metric in Mandy's playbook that saved
Which
me.
one?
I don't remember what it was called. I'll have to look and see which one I used, but it was one that saved me probably hours of figuring it out myself. So
Awesome.
Mandy's playbook. It's amazing. Shameless plug.
Yeah, I've been enjoying. I attended Summit and spoke there, but I've now been going back and watching all the sessions that I didn't attend live. Had my whole list, my spreadsheet, and I've definitely jotted down a few tips there from champions and other folks. We don't have CJ at my company yet, so I'm trying to get more educated about that, which is pretty cool. And I personally have been looking into the bot stuff a lot lately, and like things like Hit Governor, I didn't know existed until a couple of weeks ago. So now we're trying to do that. We're trying to exclude some of the Google bots. We're trying to do something called like a fake content thing, where if we identify a bot through other tools, not Adobe, we send them to a different content page that looks and feels like our site, but isn't actually our site. And we're going to toy with, like, could we put Adobe Analytics on there, but a whole different report suite, so that we capture that information, capture those IPs, and send them back up to our Akamai servers to then block those bots from the future, right? So just trying to like think of all the little incremental ways we can plug those bot holes and get our data cleaner. So something like that might not prevent it from coming in the first place, or the initial hit, but then we can use that data and send that back up and keep it from coming back or hitting our data again. So
That's
playing with a lot of bot things lately.
That's really clever. I like that.
Yeah. I'll let you guys know how it works.
One of the things that I learned recently, so we don't have CJA either. And sometimes we have reports where we want to combine our web and our transactional. So we use Power BI for reporting, and we've used the data feeds a lot. But I've learned that the Adobe connector in there, at first, it looks like you can only use static dates, but you can actually go into the code editor and change the code to use rolling dates. So I learned recently how to use rolling dates with the Adobe Analytics connector for Power BI,
Cool.
which was really cool.
Good tip.
That's awesome.
All right. If there's no other questions, does anybody have any closing comments before we end the session?
Feel free to if you found this useful, love to hear any feedback. We're all on LinkedIn. I think many of us posted about this. Feedback, good or bad, how we can make it better. We want this to be relevant for you all. And if you're interested in becoming a champion, applications are open now. So feel free. Again, if you have questions, you can ask us, but those applications are open. And we're happy to answer any questions here, or you can find us on Experience League.
Shameless plug for Gatai. He spoke in the webinar earlier today on how to submit an outstanding champion application. So
it worked for him. So
so there is show your passion. But
yeah, applications are open now until I believe June 10th. Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending. This session will be posted on YouTube within the next couple of days. And make sure you join the user group so you get alerted for all of our new sessions. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Have a great day.